Hello, and welcome to my presentation on the physics of precognition and synchronicity, an autoethnographic project. Autoethnography is a qualitative research discipline which uses the researcher's own personal experience as data. We'll start with temporal windows, which have been identified with studies in human perception. These are junctures where externally counted sequential time couples with internally felt timelessness. 3 such windows have been identified in research with metronomes, which are music devices that produce a regular spaced continuous sequence of beats. The functional moment, which is the threshold of the smallest perceived separation of moments, 30 to 300 milliseconds. The experience moment, which groups perception and action into an extended feeling of now, 300 milliseconds to 3 seconds. And mental presence, which binds cognition, emotion, and working memory into an even larger moment of the feeling of self. The functional moment. Human hearing can't separate beats 20 to 60 milliseconds apart. 2 beats blend into one. So while the 2 beats are separated in linear time, consciousness perceives them simultaneously. We can also say that linear time is compressed in between the 2 beats. Comparably, in spectroscopy with poor resolution, a spectral line appears as a single, but in high resolution, it splits into more lines, like a doublet, triplet, etc., as the diagram on the left shows. The experience moment. At the next level up, beats 300 milliseconds apart are heard separately, but every 2 to 3 beats are heard closer together in tightly knit groups. There's still a constant interval between the beats in linear objective time, but it's as if consciousness is now striving for simultaneity and is creating these periodic bundles. There is both compression and expansion. The binding or integration into wholes is actually a general feature of consciousness that's been established from brain neurodynamics. Mental presence level. This is a 3rd level of temporal window. It's called mental presence. The beats separated by more than 2 seconds are heard as totally discrete and in a regular spaced sequence. There is no compression detectable compared to the previous 2 windows and no integration into groups. For the purpose of this presentation, I will call the range for all 3 of these windows below 3 seconds, as the temporal window of the lower self. Could there be even higher temporal windows? Is it possible for consciousness to achieve compression and integration into simultaneity with time periods above 3 seconds? Now, I would like to make an analogy of these 3 temporal windows to the temporal levels of the universe. At the bottom level, we have the functional moment. It's like the state the universe was in before the Big Bang, where everything was simultaneous, a realm of atemporal chaos with only light particles and only compression. At the next level up, the experience moment with both the compression and expansion present. This seems comparable to the current state of the universe with 25% matter and 75% vacuum energy. Matter compresses the universe and vacuum energy expands it. Because these forces are acting in opposite directions, this is the eotemporal level, which is successive but directionless time. It is cyclical time, and we find cycles in stars, planets, and organic life, which dominate our universe. Finally, at the top level of the mental presence, there's only expansion. Time is fully separated into no temporality, or what we call the arrow of time. On the universal scale, total separation could look like the infinite expansion of a heat-death scenario, or if we think in terms of more dimensions, as the multiverse, which are separate whole universe, like metronome beats. Okay. Now I will start presenting some personal narrative and photographic experiences of synchronicity. My first story is, I once saw this bright graffiti out in the city, and half an hour later at home, I saw the repetition of this image in the clouds brewing outside my window. Notice the angle in the clouds and the bright colors, but the pink and the purple are flipped up and down between the pictures. I interpreted this symbolically as the famous alchemical principle, as above, so below. The macrocosm repeats in the microcosm. Hermeticists were aware of this duplication or multiplication of the archetypal image. The storm actually turned into a tornado that touched down in a nearby city, which intuitively led me to contemplate the connection between synchronicity and electromagnetism and the relation of weather, Schumann resonance, and electromagnetic consciousness. This wasn't my first weather synchronicity either. Could they all be connected in some way? Synchronicities always bring some kind of insight because reality exudes messages in this way through the repetition of information. Compression of information and time. So if we're thinking about the possibility of higher temporal windows, synchronicities fit the description of what I call boundary events. Those are events that carry the duplication of information. Just like two metronome ticks, the two images of the graffiti and the balcony scene are also boundary events, which blend into one template, which we call the archetype, compressing time and information. Metronome ticks separate completely at the level of mental presence because more and more higher cognitive brain functions are beginning to be utilized at this level, and the beats are not cognitively complex enough to use up that brain processing. So the events must be something more complex than just simple beats. They have to contain more information. Synchronicities are more complex cognitive events. They possess sufficient details, complexity, and difference while still repeating the archetypal image or symbol. So they are perfect to function as boundary events for higher self temporal windows. Here's another synchronicity from last summer. I was reading Jung's book on synchronicity, and I got this feeling like I have to take a picture. Then I noticed that the green tassels on the bookmark repeat the green strands of the evergreen plant in the corner. Looking further, there's a little green snake on the book cover itself. So 3 examples of the archetype of green string, all in one picture. Then also there are 3 lines of the horizon in that circle where the snake is on the cover: blue sky, peachy middle, and gray ground. And similarly, my own horizon in the photo shows a blue sky, a peachy middle from some of the buildings, and a gray floor. Fractal-like repetition. Thinking of further associations, I saw a little green snake in Costa Rica jungle a few months before that on vacation, and I have a green snake tattoo, which represents Kundalini, something Jung also studied. Synchronicities can pile up and interconnect in this way, like strands of a network of meaning. There are different classes of synchronicity. One type is where information repeats between a mental image and a physical image. In this story, what basically happened is that I wished for bees to come to me, and a few hours later, this bumblebee sat on my hand out of nowhere and just stayed eerily still. Feel free to pause the presentation, by the way, and read through the stories more carefully because I'm kind of rushing through it to save time. The conscious image is not necessarily visual either. So here was a general intention of wanting an interaction with a bee, and the physical image that followed was the bee sitting on my hand. This also got me interested in magnetic abilities in animals. The second class of synchronicity is when a physical image repeats another physical image. One night, there was a drizzle of rain in the air, and I noticed that if I take photos, I can capture beautiful long exposure paths of the raindrops. One picture I took had this Roman numeral 9 from raindrops in the air, and an hour later, I ran across a building with the same numeral sign at the top. Atom and archetype. Pauli and Jung worked on integrating archetypal theory and physics for 26 years. Pauli envisioned the atom as the self, and each quantum orbital is a different level of the self. The higher levels are more energetic and correspond to more conscious states. Also, if the nucleus is like the archetype, then each shell is like one manifestation of the archetype. The inner ones are psychic images. The outer ones are physical events. So a person is not just confined to the body, but is a quantum field of force. I want to demonstrate this atom analogy using a few of the fights from my martial arts practice, Muay Thai, and how the archetype of the magician, which is a tarot card, got channeled in them. The image below was my first fight, or the first quantum orbital. So you can see my arms are in the same position as the magician, and I'm wearing a t-shirt with an infinity symbol, just like the one above the magician's head. So this was totally unplanned. The picture of my third fight above repeats the piece of artwork I have at home, which is the female magician. A little bit different, but still carrying the same symbolism. We're both wearing green tops, patterned bottoms, and holding things in our right arms. So the third fight was like a second quantum orbital. And here's the fifth fight. I had this other alignment of photos on my phone. The one-armed crab kind of mirrors the pose in the arms again, but that's probably the only element of the magician left at this point. As the shells and events get progressively larger and take up more space-time, there's more quantum entanglement, which means more correlations and mixing of information. So in this last shell, the original magician archetype is the least clear. The higher self. How can we define the higher self, whose temporal windows we are seeking? On the left is the cover of a poetry book I wrote. The two parrots are mirroring each other, and in that, they're channeling a higher alien-like being between them. You can see it's literally looking through their eyes. Just like time gets compressed between two boundary events, a higher being also gets channeled between two mirroring personalities or psychological traits for that matter. So now we can apply the three levels of the temporal window from the lower self to the higher self and see how they show up in synchronicities. So the higher self's functional moment, here it would be the boundary events would have to appear simultaneously in space and time. So in this picture of little baby Toby, he has a little crab toy on his belly. He's making a crab claw poses with his hands, and he's also a Cancer zodiac symbol. So three symbols of the crab repeated all in one picture or in one moment of space-time. The higher self's experience moment. At this level, the synchronicities would be grouped close together in time, but not necessarily simultaneous. Here's one story when my friend brought me butterfly earrings from Mexico. The next morning, I took a picture in front of a butterfly graffiti outside my work, and later that morning, I got a spam email from some horoscope service, and the first line in there was telling me about 6 monarchs, just like the graffiti, 4 monarchs in the back and 2 on my ears. So the 3 events here are all grouped within less than 24 hours. Higher self's mental presence. So this is the level, at this level, the boundary events become fully separated and aligned in a regularly repeated sequence. So the way I visualize this is a sequence of stacked dimensions or levels of self, kind of like the multiverse or quantum orbitals. Here's where I think clairvoyance and precognition come into play, something I've been experiencing for many years. Here's another example. This is from a Muay Thai tournament in Iowa. Before my final fight, I had a vision of a green sphere. And then on the ride home, I took the selfie, I put a filter on it with the photos, and all of a sudden this green sphere showed up in the bottom left corner. You can see it's kind of like around me, protecting me. So I always wondered, why is this psychic image only last a few seconds, and then the event that follows it kind of repeats it within 24 hours, usually, give or take. These time frames always mystified me. And now I think the reason is it's because the higher self, which includes the self extended into the future for a period of time, needs to fit into the lower self's temporal window in order to communicate or signal to us, in order to be felt as real and not just imagined as in a mental abstract idea, for example, when we think of the future. The temporal windows have to be roughly similar in order to align and feel each other as physically real. What is the higher quantum self? One way I imagine is the higher self is a series of 3-second temporal windows, or whatever contents or images they hold, as smeared out in space, like a stretched out accordion, and then compressed, like closing the accordion. So they superimpose on each other like transparent images, or something for a quantum wave perhaps would look like this. Another more collective higher self may be a superposition of temporal windows from different people, and this could explain telepathy. Closed time-like curves. I'm a big fan of electromagnetic theories of consciousness. So if we assume each temporal window's contents, at least for vision anyways, is an electromagnetic field or a light image, then using general relativity, we imagine how this light can bend back on itself in time, but not in a closed loop, but rather a spiral to return to a smaller space and time from the higher self to the lower self. This explains how a precognitive image is received and forecasts a future physical event. The image is 3 seconds long because as light moves toward the lower self, it becomes compressed by the Doppler effect. Any sized event gets folded like an accordion. Closed time-like curves may be the mechanism of memory compression, so a lower self's precognition is basically a higher self's memory. Additionally, perhaps light travels this way down through levels of space and time, because it also travels as a spiral through space. Compression and communication. So this is a very packed story with lots and lots of symbolisms and synchronicities. It shows the channeling of the archetype of the angel of Gabriel, and spiritually, angels are considered to be very high levels of self. So there could be different levels of self, and these are very high ones. These synchronous events extended into a much larger time period, And the whole reason for synchronicity is to produce insight or send messages from higher to lower levels. So this kind of signaling happens in biology too, for example, when DNA decompresses into the phenotype of the organism, or on the other hand, the environment encodes DNA through evolution. And you can pause and read through the story here. We can channel different entities this way. So I've included some pictures of ascended masters that clairvoyants like Blavatsky and Steiner spoke of. See if you can spot the repetitive elements between the pairs of different photos here. And all of these show up randomly, spontaneously. None of these are planned. Tarot cards are common symbols of the collective unconscious that just show up. If you're interested in the collective unconscious, I'm not going to go in depth here because I'm already running out of time, but here is more about it and how it's similar to superorganisms. Here is the type of research, arts-based, qualitative, phenomenological research we can do with synchronicity and the kinds of things we can discover. If anyone's interested in delving a little more into the written portions here, also see if you can spot more repetitions between each pair of photos. Collective unconscious manifestation. So we can start testing the differences between individual unconscious, which is subject to just one person, and the collective unconscious, which is subject to all this extended space and time outside one person's body. And then conscious manifestation is when we begin to use the principle of information repetition consciously to call forth the image into events, which is basically how magic operates. We basically stage the synchronicity in order to anchor a specific energy, meaning, or entity. And this kind of research is called archetypal or image work or imagination-based research. And to study human experience, we have to start using transdisciplinary methodologies to integrate psychology with physics. So purely quantitative methods and mathematical methods are no longer suitable. They're good for theory, but when we're studying meaning and experience, we have to start using mixed methods, quantitative plus qualitative, arts-based, and imagination-based research. If anybody's interested, there's a link to a pilot study that I performed this semester on group synchronicity. So yeah, and I probably will be doing that as a full study for my PhD dissertation. Here is, to finish off, here's a collection of photos which are recurring synchronicity in my life, heart shapes. Here are my references. Thank you very much. My contact if anybody's interested in keeping in touch. And thank you for watching, listening, and reading. Cheers.